There are men who seem built differently, men who carry themselves with a steadiness that the world mistakes for ease. You have seen the face 1,000 times. The jaw, the eyes, the smile that felt like a handshake from someone you could trust with anything. You have watched him fill a screen with something that most actors spend entire careers chasing, a quiet, unshakable realness. And you probably thought, the way most people do, that a man like that simply does not break. But what if everything you assumed was wrong? What if the version of him you fell in love with, the one standing in the Hawaiian sun, laughing easy, looking like the world had never landed a single blow, was also the man quietly fighting battles that never made it into any headline? What happens to a legend when the cameras stop? What do you do when the life you built, brick by careful brick, begins to tremble in ways you never expected? And perhaps most urgently, what does it mean that at 81 years old, the man millions of people grew up watching is still here, still standing, and still somehow more himself than he has ever been? Stay with this, because what happened to Tom Selleck is not what you think. Thomas William Selleck was born on January 29, 1945, in Detroit, Michigan, and from his very first years, the world he inhabited was one defined by movement and reinvention. His father, Robert Dean Selleck, was a real estate executive and businessman, a man of quiet ambition who believed that a family should always be reaching towards something better. His mother, Martha, was warm and grounded, the kind of woman whose presence in a room made everything feel a little more manageable. Tom was the second of 4 children, and the family dynamic was one of genuine closeness. Meals together, laughter that echoed off kitchen walls, a father who showed up, and a mother who made home feel like the safest place on earth. When Tom was 4 years old, the family packed up everything they knew in Michigan and moved west, settling in Sherman Oaks, California. The San Fernando Valley in the late 1940s was a sun-drenched stretch of possibility, a place where orange groves still ran alongside new suburban streets, where the air smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and something just slightly electric, the particular atmosphere of a region that had not yet fully decided what it was going to become. Tom grew up in that in-between world. He was athletic almost from the beginning, the kind of kid who seemed most alive when his body was in motion. Baseball in the street, basketball in the driveway, football on any patch of open ground he could find. There was joy and movement that he could not quite find anywhere else, and that joy would become one of the defining truths of his life. He attended Grant High School in Van Nuys, and it was there that the first stirrings of something larger began. He was tall, eventually reaching 6 feet 4 inches, and broad-shouldered, and he had a face that caught light in a way that felt almost unfair to everyone around him. But Tom Selleck was not the kind of handsome that knew it was handsome. That was the thing that separated him. He was genuinely unsure of himself, genuinely searching, the way most young men are when they stand at the edge of their own futures and cannot see past the fog. He played basketball well enough to earn a scholarship offer, and for a time the future looked like it might be one of stadiums and scoreboards. But something else was pulling at him, something quieter, more uncertain, and far more terrifying. He stumbled into acting almost by accident, nudged by a drama coach who saw something in him that he had not yet learned to see in himself. The University of Southern California beckoned, and he enrolled, studying business while taking acting classes that began to feel less like a hobby and more like a calling. He worked. He studied. He drove himself across the city to auditions that went nowhere, to casting offices where he was too tall or not right or almost, but not quite. He did commercial work, an early Pepsi ad, appearances in small television roles that flickered briefly and disappeared. He studied under acting coach Estelle Harmon, and it was in those classes that something began to crystallize. He was learning not just how to perform, but how to be still, how to let a scene breathe, how to trust the space between words. But trust is a fragile thing when the world keeps saying no. The rejection years were long, longer than most people know. Tom Selleck spent the better part of a decade walking into rooms and walking back out of them without the thing he needed. He was 21, 23, 26, 28, and still the breakthrough refused to arrive. There is something uniquely defeating about almost making it. A flat rejection is clean. It ends the question. But the near misses, the callbacks that lead to nothing, the roles that go to someone else by a margin you will never fully understand, those have a particular cruelty to them. They keep hope alive just enough to keep the wound open. The most painful near miss came in the form of a role that would have changed American television history. In 1977, Tom Selleck was cast as James Garner's son in a revival project. And then, in 1979, something happened that should have launched him into the stratosphere immediately. He was seriously considered for the role of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. He made it further in that process than almost anyone outside the production knew. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were impressed. The screen test was strong. And then the opportunity evaporated, not because he failed, but because he had already committed to a small television project that was just beginning to take shape. A show called Magnum, P.I. He chose the television commitment. Indiana Jones went to Harrison Ford. Sit with that for a moment. Sit with the weight of that choice, made before anyone could know what either path would become. Tom Selleck drove home that day and did not know, could not know, whether he had just made the worst decision of his professional life. He was 35 years old. He had been trying to break through for 15 years. And now he had turned down what might have been the role of a generation. The silence inside that car must have been enormous. The kind of silence that presses on the chest and makes the air feel thick and close and hard to breathe. And sometimes the thing that looks like the wrong door is actually the only door that leads somewhere real. Magnum, P.I. premiered on CBS on December 11, 1980, and the world was not quite ready for what it was about to receive. The show was set in Hawaii, lush, sun-soaked, improbably beautiful Hawaii, and it starred Tom Selleck as Thomas Magnum, a Vietnam War veteran turned private investigator who worked and lived on a sprawling estate called Robin's Nest. There was a red Ferrari. There was a Hawaiian shirt that became a cultural artifact. There was a mustache that somehow managed to be simultaneously masculine and approachable, rugged and warm, the physical shorthand for a man who had seen hard things and come through them without losing his sense of humor. The Ferrari became the symbol. That red Ferrari 308 GTS, gleaming in the Hawaiian sun, wind coming through the windows, Thomas Magnum at the wheel with a grin that said he knew something the rest of the world was still figuring out. That car wasn't just a prop. It was a declaration. It said, "Life is short, the road is beautiful, and some men are simply built to move through the world with style." Magnum, P.I. became one of the most watched television programs in America. At its peak, the show pulled in audiences of more than 20 million viewers per episode. Tom Selleck was nominated for multiple Emmy Awards and won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Drama Series in 1985. The role transformed him, not just professionally, but in the way the public understood and related to him. He was not a movie star playing at television. He was something rarer, a genuine television icon, a man whose face and presence defined the entire aesthetic of an era. But here is what most people never talk about. He was also, quietly, in a kind of personal wilderness. The early 1980s were professionally triumphant and personally turbulent. His first marriage, to model Jacqueline Ray, had ended in 1982 after 11 years together. Tom had adopted her son, Kevin, and the end of that marriage was not a clean break. It was the kind of fracturing that leaves marks on everything it touches. He had cared. He had tried. And still it had not held. There is a particular loneliness that comes after the end of a long relationship. Not the sharp pain of a quick wound, but the slow, dull ache of realizing that something you built with your hands has come apart, and you are standing in the rubble trying to figure out who you are without it. He was famous. He was recognized everywhere he went. He could not buy groceries without someone wanting a photograph, could not sit in a restaurant without the weight of public attention pressing on every conversation. And inside all of that brightness and noise and recognition, he was a man trying to find steady ground. He returned, again and again, to the land. This is something that does not make the entertainment magazines, does not generate the headlines, but it is perhaps the most essential thing about Tom Selleck. He has worked a ranch in California for decades, a real working ranch, not a vanity property, but a place where he knows the names of the cattle, where the fences need mending and the seasons set the schedule, not the Hollywood calendar. There is something almost radical about that in a world that rewards performance above all else. The ranch asks for presence. The land doesn't care about your fame. It just asks whether you showed up. He showed up. Then came 1987, and something shifted. He married Gilly Mack, a British actress and dancer he had met in 1983 during a London production of Cats. Their courtship was quiet and genuine, protected, deliberately, from the public gaze. When they married on August 7, 1987, in Donaldson, Nevada, they kept it private. No press, no performance, just two people who had chosen each other. It was, by every account he has given, the beginning of the real chapter of his life. Their daughter, Hannah Margaret Selleck, was born in December 1988, and Tom Selleck, who had spent decades performing versions of Strength for a living, was undone, completely, joyfully, irreversibly undone by fatherhood. He has spoken about it in the plain-spoken way he speaks about everything that matters to him. He didn't dress it up. He just said, everything changed, and that was the complete truth. But the world of entertainment rarely lets a man settle into contentment without testing it. As Magnum, P.I. wrapped its final season in 1988, Tom Selleck faced the question that all television icons eventually face. What comes next? He transitioned to film with varying results. 3 Men and a Baby, released in 1987, was a massive box office success, warm, funny, and commercial in the best possible way. But his film career never quite caught fire the way the television work had. There were projects that underperformed, critical assessments that were mixed, and a slow, creeping realization that the particular magic he possessed was somehow most fully expressed in the long form of television storytelling rather than the compressed urgency of film. He could have spiraled. He could have resented it, or chased the wrong things, or spent the 1990s trying to force his way into a cinematic world that was not fully opening its doors. Instead, he made a different choice, and this is, in many ways, the choice that defines his character more clearly than any of the roles he ever played. He came back to television, not out of failure, but out of clarity. He appeared as Dr. Richard Burke on Friends in the late 1990s, in a recurring role that reminded an entire new generation why he made television feel better simply by being in it. He starred in a series of Jesse Stone films for CBS, slow-burning, morally serious crime dramas in which he played a quietly broken police chief finding his way back to himself. And the resonance of those films was something that surprised even the critics who had counted him out. And then, in 2010, he returned to the show that would become the second great chapter of his small-screen legacy. Blue Bloods premiered on CBS on September 24, 2010, and Tom Selleck stepped into the role of Frank Reagan, the police commissioner of New York City and the patriarch of a multi-generational family of law enforcement officers. The character was everything Selleck had spent a lifetime learning to embody. Principled without being rigid, warm without being soft, someone who carried the weight of difficult decisions with a kind of quiet grace that made you believe he had earned every line on his face. The show ran for 14 seasons. 14 years of Sunday dinner scenes and hard choices, and a character who, episode after episode, asked the same fundamental questions that Tom Selleck has been asking his whole life. What do you owe to the people you love? What do you owe to the institution you serve? And when those two things come into conflict, When loyalty and principle pull in opposite directions, what does an honorable person actually do? He played Frank Reagan with the mustache. Of course he did. And every time that red thread of recognition appeared on screen, every time a viewer saw that face, that bearing, that particular quality of stillness, it was a callback to everything that came before. The Hawaiian shirts, the red Ferrari, the man who had been here, in our living rooms, doing the difficult and beautiful work of making people feel less alone in the world. The final episode of Blue Bloods aired in 2024, ending a run that had been one of the longest and most consistently watched dramas in recent American television history. And Tom Selleck, at 80 years old, walked out of that chapter with something that most careers never achieve. He was more admired at the end than he had been at the beginning. At 81, the man who most people assumed had coasted on ease and genetics has revealed himself to be something far more interesting. A person who made deliberate, courageous choices at every fork in the road. Who turned down Indiana Jones and got Thomas Magnum. Who left Hollywood's bright center and went to work on a ranch. Who chose a quiet marriage over a public performance of one. Who kept showing up, season after season, decade after decade. Not because fame demanded it, but because the work mattered and the character he was playing. The good man, the steady man, the man who held the table together, was somehow always a version of himself. He has spoken quietly about faith, not loudly, not performatively, but with the ease of a man for whom belief is simply part of the furniture of his life. He has talked about the value of consistency over brilliance, of daily work over grand gestures, of what it means to be present in the lives of the people you love rather than perpetually arriving at some future destination. His daughter Hannah has followed him into the equestrian world, competing at a high level as a show jumper. Watching his child succeed, not because of his name, but because of her own dedication and skill, has given him a particular joy that he clearly struggles to find adequate words for. Some satisfactions are just too large for language. And the ranch, that working ranch in California where the fences need mending and the cattle have names and the land asks nothing of you except your actual presence, that remains. After all the years and all the roles and all the awards and all the decades, he goes back there. He gets up early. He works. He knows what needs to be done and he does it, without performance, without an audience, without anything to prove to anyone. That is the man at 81. Not the image, not the mustache, not the Ferrari, though the Ferrari still matters, still carries the symbolic weight of every door that opened when it should have stayed closed, every season that arrived after the long winter of waiting, every morning that came after the night of doubting whether it would. Now I want to talk directly to you. You came here, to this video, because something in that title caught your attention. Maybe it was the age. 81 feels significant, feels like a number that demands acknowledgement. Maybe it was the promise of emotion, the suggestion that something worth feeling was waiting on the other side of the play button. Maybe you grew up with Tom Selleck in your living room, and some part of you needed to check in on him the way you check in on someone you once loved without ever meeting them. Whatever brought you here, stay with me for just one more minute. Because the thing that Tom Selleck's life actually demonstrates is not a lesson about Hollywood or talent or luck. It is a lesson about choosing, over and over, to be the person you actually are rather than the person the world is asking you to be. He turned down Indiana Jones. He went back to television. He bought the ranch and worked it himself. He kept the marriage quiet, and the family close, and the faith real. He said no to the things that would have taken him away from himself, and yes to the things, even the unglamorous, uncinematic things, that brought him back. You have your own version of that choice. You have your own fork in the road where one direction looks like what the world expects of you, and the other direction looks like what you actually need. Tom Selleck, standing at 81 with a face that has finally, fully earned every one of its lines, is not a story about a man who got everything right. He is a story about a man who kept getting back up, who kept choosing, who kept going back to the ranch, that real, unglamorous, beautiful ranch, when the glamorous world got to be too much. And maybe that red Ferrari is still out there somewhere, parked in a garage in Hawaii that exists only in memory and old footage and the particular warmth of a generation's shared nostalgia. But the feeling it represented, the feeling of moving forward, wind in your face, not quite knowing what's coming next, but somehow completely convinced that it's worth driving toward, that feeling doesn't belong to Tom Selleck alone. It belongs to anyone willing to stay in the car. So here is the question this story leaves you with. What have you been waiting for permission to choose? What is the version of yourself that the world's noise has been drowning out? And what would it take? What would it actually, honestly take for you to drive toward it? Don't answer out loud. Just sit with it. Let it breathe. That, after all, is what he would do.